In the seething heart of the 12th century Middle East, where the Crusader kingdoms fought relentless battles to maintain their fragile presence among ancient peoples, a young, sick, and fearless king dreamed of something grand. Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem, was not only a symbol of physical and spiritual resistance, he also harbored bold plans that could have changed the course of history. Among these dreams, one stands out for its ambition, and the silence time has imposed upon it, the forgotten siege of Damascus. In this video, we will relive this little-known episode, yet one deeply revealing of Baldwin's strategic vision. A moment when, for a brief time, the city of Damascus, jewel of Syria and bastion of Islam, was in the crosshairs of the Crusader armies. What alliances made this plan possible? What hidden interests were at play? And above all, why did this daring endeavor never come to fruition? Get ready to dive into a tale of diplomacy, disease, internal rivalries, and missed opportunities. By the end, you will understand how this frustrated dream reveals as much about Baldwin's spirit as it does about the limits of the crusading project in the Levant. In the 12th century, the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was a Christian enclave surrounded by Muslim powers in constant reorganization. After the First Crusade, the cities of Antioch, Tripoli, and Jerusalem established themselves as bastions of Latin faith in the East, supported by Western knights and military orders such as the Templars and Hospitallers. However, their survival depended on fragile alliances, scarce resources, and charismatic leaders. Amid this setting, Baldwin ascended the throne in 1174, defying his debilitating physical condition to assert authority over a divided kingdom. And amid the threats, he turned his gaze toward Damascus. Baldwin, the young king afflicted by leprosy, showed from an early age a remarkable sense of leadership, charisma, and political calculation. Despite the disease that consumed his body, his strategic mind remained sharp, and among his boldest projects was the conquest of Damascus, the Syrian jewel that had already eluded the Crusaders during the failed Second Crusade. But unlike the ill-fated expedition of 1148, Baldwin's plan emerged from an unexpectedly favorable geopolitical reality. In the 1170s, the Islamic world of the region was experiencing a phase of fragmentation. Although Saladin was already rising in Egypt and northern Syria, Damascus still maintained a certain degree of autonomy, governed by local lords reluctant to cede power to the Ayyubid Sultan. Baldwin, attentive to the internal tensions among the Muslim cities, saw an opportunity. If he could ally himself with Saladin's enemies, or at least exploit their rivalry with Damascus, he might achieve the impossible, bring the city under Christian control. The idea matured around the year 1180. Saladin had conquered Aleppo, and his authority was growing rapidly, but it was not yet absolute. The king of Jerusalem then tried to forge alliances with Muslim potentates, fearful of Ayyubid domination. Sources suggest that Crusader envoys established contacts with leaders in Mosul, and even with elements inside Damascus, who saw Saladin's influence as a greater threat than the Latins. On the Frankish side, preparations were quiet but significant. Baldwin gathered forces with nobles from northern Syria, counted on the initial support of Reynald of Chatillon, Prince of Antioch by marriage, and famous for his audacity, and also tried to persuade the knights of the military orders to support the campaign. However, not all the kingdom's barons were convinced. Many considered the plan reckless, especially in the face of Saladin's growing power, who had already proven his military and political skill. Baldwin's great advantage was the possibility of capturing Damascus before Saladin could consolidate his authority there. According to the chronicler William of Tyre, there were even rumors of a negotiated surrender under the promise of protection for the population and religious freedom. If this were true, and there is reason to believe it was, given the diplomatic norms of the time, then the siege would not even be necessary. Damascus would open its gates to the leper king. But the opposing factors quickly piled up. Baldwin's health began to deteriorate more rapidly during this period, hindering his continued presence in prolonged military campaigns. Moreover, internal rivalries among the Latin nobles intensified. Guy of Lusignan, recently married to Sibylla, the king's sister, emerged as an ambitious and controversial figure, dividing the court and undermining the unity needed for such a risky campaign. On the Muslim side, Saladin did not remain idle. Informed of the Christian movements and possible internal betrayals in Damascus, he acted swiftly. He reinforced the city's garrison, carried out shows of force in the surrounding areas, and took steps to neutralize any possibility of disloyalty from his Muslim rivals. With that, he closed the window of opportunity that Baldwin was trying to open. The siege never happened. The dream of taking Damascus, which for a moment seemed within reach, dissolved amid illness, political disputes, and Saladin's strategic skill. Still, the episode remains one of the most revealing of Baldwin's mind. It was not just about defense. He dreamed of expansion, of decisive strikes, of shifting the axis of conflict in favor of the Latins. His vision went beyond mere resistance. He wanted to win. Even though he did not march on Damascus, the very attempt to orchestrate such an endeavor shows the complexity of the political and military game in the Levant. Baldwin understood that controlling central Syria could isolate Saladin in Egypt and keep the Muslims divided for a longer time. He was not just a sick king trying to stay alive. He was a strategist trying to change the fate of his people and of Eastern Christendom. This episode also exposes the multifaceted nature of relations between Christians and Muslims during the Crusades. It was not all open warfare. There were treaties, espionage, parallel diplomacy, promises of autonomy, and even temporary alliances between rival faiths. Baldwin played this game with rare skill, and although Damascus remained Muslim, the leper king showed that his mind was sharper than any blade. The frustration of the plan against Damascus was more than a military defeat. It was a strategic and symbolic loss for Baldwin. Even though the siege was never launched, the mere fact that the king had mobilized so many political resources around this idea revealed to the Crusader world the fragility of the kingdom's internal structures. For the first time clearly, the limits of royal authority began to emerge, not only due to the monarch's leprosy, but also due to the fragmentation of noble interests. Baldwin's health was rapidly deteriorating, making him increasingly dependent on regents, advisors, and military commanders. Even so, he continued to exert influence over the most critical decisions. As the project against Damascus crumbled, Saladin, in turn, was reinforcing his image as the unifier of Islam. Before long, he would become Sultan of all Syria and Egypt, something the Crusaders might have prevented had they succeeded in dividing the Muslim world with the fall of Damascus. Internally, the plan's failure strengthened those who wished to maintain the defensive status quo and weakened those who, like Baldwin, dreamed of expansion and initiative. The Templars, who at first had shown sympathy for the project, adopted a more cautious stance, concerned about the risks of direct confrontation with Saladin on Syrian territory. Renaud of Chatillon, increasingly radical and impetuous, began to act independently, attacking Muslim caravans and undermining any chance of future alliances or treaties Baldwin still hoped to establish. Moreover, the failure of the diplomatic effort in Damascus highlighted the need to define a stable succession. Baldwin, though young, already understood he did not have much time. His sister Sibylla, mother of Baldwin V, became a central figure in political plans. The king, increasingly surrounded by rival factions between supporters of Guy of Lusignan and defenders of Raymond III of Tripoli, was forced to partially abdicate power in 1183, naming his nephew as co-king. The dream of Damascus was now only a memory. Politically, the Muslims emerged stronger. The lack of cohesion among the Latins shown during the failed attempt to capture Damascus was carefully observed by Saladin, who understood that it was not necessary to crush the Crusaders on the battlefield. It was enough to undermine them from within, encouraging their divisions and exploiting the fatigue of their foreign policy. Before long, Saladin would succeed in uniting Damascus and Aleppo under his authority, ending any chance of a new crusader attempt against the heart of Syria. Nevertheless, the memory of Baldwin's plan was not entirely erased. Some chroniclers of the period, such as William of Tyre, preserved in their works discreet mentions of the efforts to take Damascus. Although they did not devote much space to the episode, it is possible to see that, for them, this was a moment when the Latin kingdom could have turned the tide. Unlike the louder and bloodier Crusades, this episode revealed Baldwin as a diplomat, sharp and perceptive, who understood the political dynamics of Islam as well as the Muslim emirs themselves. Even in failure, the episode reinforces Baldwin's singular legacy, a king who, though physically limited, dared to think big. The attempt to take Damascus shows that he did not accept the passive role of a mere defender of Christendom. In his vision, Jerusalem was not only to resist, it was to dominate, influence, intervene. This thinking, however, was not continued after his death. With the rise of Guy of Lusignan, marked by disorganization and recklessness, the kingdom of Jerusalem quickly moved toward disaster. In 1187, just a few years after Baldwin's reign ended, Saladin would crush the Crusader armies at Hattin and take Jerusalem. By then, the failed siege of Damascus was already a distant memory, a missed opportunity that might have changed the entire course of history. The loss of initiative was one of the unintended legacies of Baldwin's death. Without his strategic mind, the kingdom lost its ability to think politically with depth. The kings who succeeded him possessed neither his courage nor his diplomatic intelligence. The siege that never was, therefore, should not be read as a mere failure, but as a sign that under Baldwin's leadership, the Crusaders still dared to dream of victory, even surrounded by enemies and ravaged by disease. Damascus escaped, Saladin consolidated his power, and the kingdom of Jerusalem plunged into crisis. But that brief interval between 1180 and 1181, when the walls of Damascus seemed within reach of a sick king, remains one of the last sparks of boldness before the twilight of the Crusader project in the Levant. The story of the forgotten siege of Damascus is, above all, a portrait of Baldwin's brilliant mind and tireless spirit. Even condemned by an incurable disease, he did not resign himself to a life of waiting and defense. He dreamed of expansion, dared to negotiate with former enemies, and saw possibilities where others saw only stagnation. In this little-remembered episode, the leper king revealed himself not only as a determined warrior, but as a refined strategist, aware of the complex game of alliances, rivalries, and political opportunities that shaped the 12th century East. As we reflect on this failed attempt to conquer Damascus, we are invited to reconsider Baldwin's role in the Crusades. He was not merely a martyr of leprosy, but an active, lucid, and ambitious sovereign. A man who, by a narrow margin, nearly rewrote the course of Christendom in the Holy Land. If this story caught your attention, like the video, share it with your friends, and comment below what else you'd like to see about Baldwin and the Crusades. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's much more to be told about this extraordinary king and the destinies he tried to change.